Ma'am, thanks for joining us today on Leadership Log, which is a podcast for the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center community on topics of interest. And a topic of interest today, and for many days prior to this, is leading remotely. How do you work in teams in this kind of remote digital environment? So we're here today to speak with you. And if you could just introduce yourself, give us a little of your background and how you came to learn so much about this topic.
Absolutely. So my name is Alexis Gerst, and I am an acquisition program manager. I'm currently on active duty, stationed at Hill Air Force Base. I work in the Armament Directorate under Lifecycle Management Center. So very active in the acquisition community. And really all of us kind of had to go to telework when we went to into the pandemic and had to start adapting and learning how to transition all of our processes and what we do and how we operate to a remote environment and kind of get used to not being able to go into an office and work together with each other. So in that process, I started transitioning my own team's activities and learned a lot of lessons along the way and started observing how other team leads were also adapting or maybe not so well, and learning those lessons and then helping teach them what I was doing and what was working for me, and help to help them get those processes up and running for them and their teams as well, so they could be more productive and collaborate together. Of course, we do want to say that even though I am on active duty, this project, this leading remotely passion project of mine and the book that I have, was all done on personal time. And we're also recording this podcast on personal time. And these views and everything I talk about are my own personal ideas and do not represent the official position of the Air Force or Lifecycle Management Center.
Thank you. And so let's get right into it. Let's talk a little bit about telework. So I think everybody remembers in the beginning the problems getting onto VPN, the fact that there wasn't a lot of collaboration software that would talk to other platforms. And those were huge adjustments, of course. But I think the biggest adjustment was just the way that you managed your day and the way that you interacted with your team. And so can you talk to us a little bit about that and what you learned and observed in your research?
Absolutely. So a lot of us were really used to going into the office, being able to talk to each other face to face, and being able to maybe go into a conference room to have meetings and things like that. And having that physical, drive to work and then drive home to be able to separate your day between your personal life and your professional life. And that really changed a lot when we went to telework. So a lot of people had the challenge of learning to separate maybe a separate area of their home for telework. Many people didn't have a space established for it, so they were just setting it up on the kitchen table and having a hard time really learning when to step away from work for kind of the, not only for their mental health really, and being able to separate that out. And it was really different learning to use a lot of the tools. So I was actually working in supply chain right when the pandemic kicked off. And then I transitioned over to a program management position mid-pandemic. And we were starting to use Microsoft Teams a little bit. I had a few people on my team that were teleworking maybe 1 or 2 days a week. So we started to use Microsoft Teams to be able to do like our team meetings and things like that while they were teleworking, so they could still be part of the team and part of the meeting. So we had a little bit of practice with that, maybe a head start on most people. And when we were all sent home to telework, we were just able to keep rolling with those team meetings and Microsoft Teams. So that was a really awesome tool that the Air Force had for us to be able to collaborate. But not everybody was up to speed on that yet because it was still a really new technology. And a lot of people were basically resorting to sending out email or PowerPoint slides and then trying to set up a conference call line to do meetings. And we were quickly oversaturated with the limited number of conference call lines we had. So collaboration was a little bit difficult that way. And people were getting creative with things like Zoom Gov or Zoom or other tools like that as well.
So, we exist now in a digital environment. More so, especially since we're in just these distributed operations. But we connect through, email, video chat, cell phones. Case in point, our conversation right now being held across the Zoom Gov. But then you hear people talking about being disconnected from their teammates, but yet aren't we really just connecting differently than we have before?
I think it is a different kind of connection. So I think the emotion around human connection and being able to work together was really one of the challenges that we faced right at the beginning, because many of us were so used to seeing each other face to face and being able to talk and have those nonverbal communications and kind of get into that richness of connection that we weren't really sure what to do when it went all digital. Many people were really uncomfortable with that. So I like to talk about a lot of the emotions that were involved in that time and the challenges to leading remotely. It really ties back to that emotional level. So a lot of people were frustrated, they were feeling disconnect, maybe loneliness, and a lot of those challenges. So one of the things I like to focus on with remote leadership is how can we connect better across a digital medium, even though we can't be physically located together. What are the ways that we can engage that connection? And one thing I think happens a lot, especially when you're not used to working constantly through a digital medium, is when you first transition to telework, you tend to be really transactional with your communication. And by that, I mean, anytime I would need to talk to somebody, reach out, maybe whether it was an email, messenger, or a phone call, I would have a set reason to do that. And it would be like a certain task that I needed to ask them about or something specific like that. And it would be like, okay, straight to the point, talk about business. All right, bye, see you later. And that really kind of misses the point of leadership and connection with your people. So I think it's really important to take some time, whether you're having like a team meeting or whether you're just talking to somebody one-on-one, to ask them how their day is going, ask them what they've been up to, and take some time to connect on a personal level and just kind of go back to establishing those personal relationships and being more intentional and making that effort to do that, because otherwise we can get really lost in the transaction of work and forget that we're all people, and we kind of miss that human connection when we're not able to go into the office and meet up with our friends such as we were during the pandemic.
I think that's a great point. And maybe it's just that we're not as aware of it. When you would walk to someone's office, you just kind of naturally will, chat a little bit along with whatever piece of business you're going to ask them about. You wouldn't never duck your head in and just ask a quick question and then leave, but we do tend to do that on the phone. I mean, it's I know our little group, we have a daily meeting that we get together and we just kind of confab and, go over the day's events and stuff like that. And now, half of that meeting is generally just chit chat about different things, or someone's cat walks in front of the camera or something like that, and we get distracted with it. But, it took some time to kind of establish that rhythm though.
Yeah, definitely. I think we kind of forgot about when we first went to telework, just the casual conversations that happen when you are in close physical proximity, when you sit in a cubicle with a few other people in a large space, and you get to talk to each other throughout the day. Hey, what are you doing this weekend? How's your daughter's basketball game? That kind of thing, I think, really adds a lot of richness to the professional relationships that we have and being able to work together. And that kind of builds up trust on your team too. So when you're able to connect on that personal level as well, it enables you to trust each other, that you have each other's best interest at heart when you're working together as well.
Yeah, and it kind of brings in the whole kind of introvert extrovert kind of thing, so you've got some people who they need that interaction with other humans on a pretty regular basis. Otherwise they're just not comfortable.
Yes, I laugh a little bit because I'm definitely an introvert. So I was totally comfortable at first, just like putting my head down. I'm going to get all my work done. And this is great because nobody's bugging me. And my husband actually started to work from home a few months later into the pandemic when he got transitioned to a civilian job. And he's a major extrovert. And so he's like across the office from me going crazy because he needs the personal interaction. And then he starts bugging me. And I'm like, no, leave me alone. I'm trying to work. But it's really interesting to see how different people relate differently with that type of environment. And actually now that we've been doing this for a while, I'm kind of getting used to more of like the, oh yes, I do want to talk to people and I do want to have those conversations, because I'm actually starting to miss that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think as a leader, you need to be attuned to what kind of people you have, and maybe supply some of that extra dialogue to keep them engaged,
Absolutely.
So, um, so we talk a lot about going back to normal, and you hear that frequently now. I mean, with the numbers coming back down, and more people getting vaccinated. But across the board, leadership, consistently says that we're not going back to normal, and that 100% of us come back to the office. That it's never going to get back to that point. So what are some ways that we can use then to lead effectively in a remote environment? And I think even, or is it possible to do that? Because I think there's some people who are skeptical that it's even possible at all.
So I think part of the vision that I pitch in my book is that things are definitely not going back to normal, in the fact that they're not going back to the way they were before. I think our normal is definitely going to change in how it looks, because a lot of leaders, especially at the senior levels, were very pleasantly surprised, I think, at how much more productive we were. They kind of had maybe some preconceived notions and misconceptions about what remote work actually is and how people operate when they're working from home. And when we were actually kind of forced into working remotely, we found that a lot of us actually can be very effective and very productive in what we do on our day-to-day. So I think now the cat's out of the bag, so to speak. And now that we know that, it's really hard to unknow that. And there's going to be a lot of people that are really pushing for more flexible options. And I think we've seen a lot of the benefits of that, whether it be certain demographics. You have different groups like military spouses that may be able to continue supporting their current organization that they're in and being able to move geographically without having to start all over in a different organization. Or groups like women, for example, and a lot of women that choose to actually leave the workforce because they maybe can't afford or can't organize or coordinate the childcare that they might need, where with a remote work situation, it might be able to be more flexible for them. And then I know General Bunch has also talked to the AFMC level about being able to promote diversity and inclusion by recruiting from other areas that we weren't able to recruit from before. Mm-hmm. And I know we have a lot of policy and everything to work out before we're going to be able to fully implement a lot of those options. And there's a lot of challenges that we need to overcome and iron out before we get there. But I think now that we know we can do that, it's going to shift the way we think of it. Instead of just saying, oh, we can't do that, we're going to say, shift the conversation more to how can we do that now?
Yeah. And there are benefits. I know our leadership has talked about, hard to fill positions, or sometimes you're looking for people like software coders with really unique skill sets. Maybe they don't want to move out of their home location in Seattle or someplace like that. So can you engage that person in a remote environment, and potentially get that skill set in that otherwise would be beyond your reach,
Definitely. I think especially some of the career fields that are harder to recruit and retain, because private industry has already been engaging remote work even before the pandemic quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So, and that's a really attractive benefit. And there's been a lot of studies done with the younger generation coming up, the millennial and Gen Z generation, that are going to be making up a larger and increasingly larger part of our workforce. They really value flexibility. That's a really big thing for them. So the government can't compete on pay, maybe compete on benefits and stability and things like that. But when you can't compete on pay, then when we're looking at recruiting and retention, what other benefits can we compete based on? And that might be one that we can really take a hard look at and say, okay, if this is an attractive option for the generation that's coming up and bringing up a large part of our workforce, how do we make that more attractive for them and more flexible for them?
Mm-hmm. Are there any particular tools that you found that you think are effective in terms of teleworking?
So as far as like from an Air Force standpoint, we use Microsoft Teams. That has really been integral to what my team does in pretty much every way. We use it for a lot of our meeting scheduling and our collaboration, being able to screen share as you're working on a document in a program office. We're very document heavy. So that's been really, really huge for our collaboration, and being able to look at the same thing at the same time and being able to give feedback that way has been huge. Another thing that is not necessarily, that's kind of a tool, is a weekly stand-up meeting that we've been using in our office. And the organization was doing that before I got there, but it was one of those things that when I saw it, I was like, this is brilliant. Why isn't everybody doing this? So a weekly stand-up meeting is kind of a genius way to help everybody prioritize what they're going to be doing for a week and look at their productivity on a weekly basis. And I like a week because it's long enough where you can get some major progress on some of the different activities that you're working on, but it's not so short as in like a day. Some people might have maybe appointments in part of their day or different meetings that kind of take up a lot of time, and they're not able to really focus on whatever their deliverables are. So a week is kind of a broader picture that they can look at being productive over. So when you get everybody together on a Monday morning, it kind of knocks the weekend dust off and gets everybody refocused on what they're doing for the week in their day job, and help them say, you know, what are my top 1 to 2 priorities and things that I'm going to accomplish this week? And what are the things that are really going to move the needle forward for our team and for our organization? So that's a really good way to help make sure you're working on the most important things instead of just getting lost in meetings and emails. And then also keep the whole team gainfully employed. So that's one way to overcome one of the objections to telework, is that, oh, well, maybe people aren't being as productive or they're not doing as much because people can't see them. Well, when you're getting your team together on a weekly basis and you're saying, okay, what are the things we want to accomplish this week and what is each person going to do? People are going to find a way to be productive and contribute and collaborate that way.
I like that you mentioned Teams or something that has like a visual element. You know, I recall that early on, we had most of our meetings just on conference calls, on voice only. And I always found it difficult, especially like in an hour-long conference, you know, to just keep attentive, you know, and adding that little bit of a visual element, even if it's just the person's face on the screen, just kind of helps me focus a little bit better. Do you find that same kind of thing, or?
I do. So we actually, depending on the device that we have, we may or may not have video capability. And most of our meetings, we don't. Although at some of our meetings, like our commanders calls and things like that with senior leaders, they'll ask us to turn video on so they can see everybody. And it's nice to see everybody's face and see who you're talking to. A lot of the people that I work with, I've never actually met in person yet. So it's nice for them to at least have like a profile picture or something in the meantime, so you can see what they look like, so that, you know, if you did go back into the office, you'd be able to recognize who you're talking to. It's kind of funny that I even have to say that, but it's a little bit true. But yeah, a lot of people get distracted when they're just voice only and not having that video. And I think video also keeps you accountable, because on a video, you know, if I'm off down here looking at my phone or whatever, you can see that and it's pretty apparent that I'm not paying attention. So just like if you're in an in-person meeting in a conference room, you feel like it's probably rude to take out your phone and start scrolling through social media or texting somebody, and you're obviously not paying attention. You can see that on video as well. So that definitely helps people focus and pay attention to the meeting a little bit more.
I like that you mentioned that you've got people on the team that you haven't met yet, because that's a common issue that people bring up is, you know, now that we've been in this for a while, we're onboarding new personnel. And so sometimes you have people that are moving from one team to the other, or PCSing in, or new hires or something like that. And so what are the challenges to onboarding somebody like that in a digital environment, you know, bringing them in when you're really not meeting them?
So it is kind of weird to work with somebody that you've never met face to face. I think if you do have the opportunity to open up the video a few times and get to see them in person, but face to face, and see what they look like and be able to see their face as you talk to them, is really kind of a second best to meeting in person. And, you know, if you can meet in person, if it's possible, with the pandemic, it was kind of a no-no. But as we go forward, it might be a little bit safer to meet in person every once in a while if you're located in the same geographic area for maybe a team breakfast or something like that. I think that's really important to building camaraderie on the team. But really, I mean, getting to know them as they come on, especially when you're onboarding new personnel, and definitely if you have somebody that has not been with the government before and they're not really sure about the culture. I know that's one concern of senior leaders, is how do we integrate these new people into the Air Force culture and the military culture as we onboard them in a digital environment, and maybe they're not familiar with, you know, how the military operates or what our values are or what some of our lingo is, and being intentional about explaining things. So in the acquisition community, we have a whole lot of acronyms. We almost speak entire sentences, and we talk in a whole acronym line, and they're like, I don't know anything that you just said. So any acronyms that you use, take the time to spell them out and explain what the different things are that you're talking about. I think is important to helping to bring them up to speed on the culture. A lot of those things that they're going to miss if they're not just in the office. You know, if you're a new person and you're in the office and you're just kind of around everybody as they're talking about different things and working on different things, you pick things up a little bit quicker. Whereas when you're working remotely, for new people especially, I recommend they go to some of the different meetings and be a part of. Maybe they don't need to do that all the time, but in the beginning, it's helpful for them to join all the meetings they can and start to get the context in different things. And then maybe if there's things that they don't understand, to write them down and then to ask questions of their supervisor or their team leader afterwards. I think that's one way that they can really start to integrate and become part of the culture on the team.
Another common issue you hear is people talk about those accidental meetings, the times when you're walking down the hallway and you just happen to run into somebody. And so, you know, an idea sparks up or something. And it always kind of struck me that, you know, if we were managing our innovation by accident like that, then maybe we should have been a little more deliberate with it anyway. But how do you continue in those kinds of things, those happenstance sort of meetings in this digital environment?
So as far as the casual conversations go, we try to integrate those. And I used to be like very transactional, like, you know, we're only doing business. We don't want to waste people's time, but it's really not a waste of people's time to have those casual conversations, like at the beginning of a meeting or at the end of the meeting, and be able to just talk informally without being all business all the time. And as far as like the happenstance meetings where maybe you wouldn't meet somebody outside, I think it's really important to be intentional in the digital environment, because your only interactions are probably going to be the ones that you initiate intentionally. So I think March was probably the month of the symposiums and the virtual networking events. I think I got no less than 8 different invitations. There was a lot. But going to events like that, to a symposium or different professional networking events and actually getting involved with it, is one really good way to allow those meetings to happen. So I'm pretty active in the Logistics Officer Association, and they had their symposium. And I actually have had more FaceTime with senior Air Force leaders since teleworking than I ever got before, because we can just hop on a Zoom call or on a Microsoft Teams and be able to talk to leaders that are around the country and around the world. I had the chance to do a Q&A with Chief Brown, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and ask him a question from my office here. And that was a really cool opportunity that I would have never gotten if I would have had to go there in person. Likewise, AFMC had like an Agile Patriot conference last fall that I got to be a part of. And it was really cool to just be able to go to that, to listen to the different leaders, and you can ask them questions directly, and then find different people that are maybe doing something similar than you, or maybe something that you're interested that's different than what you're doing now, and being able to reach out to them and ask questions. But it really comes back to being intentional about it. So you have to be intentional and initiate those things. Another tool that's been really useful for me since we've started teleworking is LinkedIn, and being able to get to know different people and connect that way as well.
So I think that just about brings us to the end of our time. But before we close, I want to see, is there anything that we've left out or anything that you'd like to add or reiterate?
So before we close out, I would like to take a moment to introduce your listeners to the book that I just published. So the book is called Leading Remote Teams: Embrace the Future of Remote Work Culture. And it's really a culmination of kind of my vision, some of the benefits and lessons learned from working remotely in this past year. And it all really stems from my experiences and how we can learn to be more productive as a team and as individuals in the remote environment, to build trust with our team as leaders, and to be able to communicate better through the digital environment. So it's called Leading Remote Teams, and it's on Amazon. If anybody's interested in it, there's an ebook and a paperback.
All right. Well, Alexis Gerst, thank you very much for joining us today on Leadership Blog. I think this was a very interesting conversation.
All right. Thank you very much.